You know why you were hired. Maybe they needed a spark, a steady hand, or a counterweight to the person above you. And for that moment, you made perfect sense. The story fit. You fit. But moments change. And here's the part most leaders never see coming. What once made you the right choice is exactly why you'll get replaced. For 23 consecutive years, I was a top nationally ranked wealth advisor, leader, and executive in the wealth management industry, building and running multi-billion-dollar businesses across 230 locations. Few ever get insider access to what it really takes to reach the top levels in this business. I launched EliteVate to change that. This is my mission. So what are you going to learn from this conversation today? 1, how the very reason you were hired can quietly become the reason why you're replaced. 2, why staying tied to the version of yourself that once fit is what makes you most exposed. 3, the subtle ways peers, teams, and new leadership start seeing the gaps you stopped addressing. And 4, the questions that will reveal whether you're still the right fit or just another familiar one. So why were you hired? Here's how it usually goes. Someone up the chain says, we need something different. They take a look at you, your background, your experience, and they see it as a fix. They'll tell you exactly what's wrong. They'll sell you on why you can fix it. And you'll step in, take the brief, and go to work. And for a few months, it looks like progress. Meetings sound sharper. Numbers inch up. Everyone breathes again. But underneath, something's off. You're doing what they've asked for. But the job underneath, it keeps changing. And before we go further, it's worth looking at why most leaders get hired in the first place. Because the pattern almost always repeats. And most leaders, they don't realize they were chosen to solve a moment, not to define the future. Every hire starts with a reason. Someone higher up sees what's missing and builds a story around it. This is what we need, and this is why you're the fit. And there's usually 3 different types of moments that they'll hire a leader for. Maybe they needed a performer, brought in to drive sales, rebuild energy, and bring life back into the business. They're great in front of people, clients, partners, and teams, and they create movement. But that same focus on momentum can sometimes mean less attention on structure, systems, and depth, and those gaps always show up later. Then there's the operators, hired when things feel chaotic or inconsistent. They'll bring structure, organization, and control, and a kind of steadiness that everyone's been asking for. They'll keep things moving on time and within the lines, but they're rarely out front, not the ones driving new ideas, building partnerships, or rallying excitement. And when the business needs visibility and presence, steadiness can start to feel like silence. And then there's the counterbalance, chosen to offset the leader above them. If the leader above them has all the pace and personality, they want somebody else that has calm and control. If the leader above them was rigid and distant, they want somebody who has warmth and connection. And at first, it works. You bring exactly what they've been missing. But when that leader above you leaves, or the business shifts, the very reason you made sense starts to fade. And that's how it happens. You're hired for a clear purpose, but if you don't grow beyond that reason, you stay tied to a story that eventually runs out of time. And at first, everything lines up. You're announced with excitement, the right hire, the new direction, the fresh start everyone's wanted. There's energy in the air, people are curious about you, supportive, and ready to believe things will turn. In your first few months, they move fast. You're learning names, joining calls, fixing the obvious stuff. You even hit a few quick wins, settling into a rhythm, and the surface looks solid. But slowly, the view starts to widen. You start noticing things that sit outside the space you were hired to handle. Operational and support challenges that drag on performance. Sales and development gaps that business keeps running into. And the parts of the business you were told belong to someone else quietly becomes yours to fix. And your team, they see it too. They're watching where you spend your time, what gets your focus, and what doesn't. And that's not judgment. That's just their awareness. And they'll start adjusting, covering and making assumptions about how to work around the pieces you're not driving. And slowly, a small gap forms between what you think they need and what they're starting to expect. Then you start leaning on your peers for their perspective. You ask how they handle similar situations, looking for confirmation that you're not missing something. And as they share what they're dealing with, you'll start seeing differences in how they operate. The areas where they seem more fluent, more connected, and more in sync with what's happening around them. But they'll notice it too. They won't say it directly, because it's still too early for that. But quietly, they start wondering if you were the right fit after all. And that's where your blind spot starts to take shape. You're still leading through the lens of why you were hired. And everyone around you can already see the edges of that story starting to show. And you see it. The role's grown past the edges of what you know best. The conversations are shifting. You can feel where your light, where your experience doesn't fully reach. And you know what needs to change. But instead of acting on it, you start managing around it. You stay close to what you are, the version of yourself that first made sense in that seat. You keep leading from that identity, Believing the role will always need it to be the same way. And you call it staying consistent. You call it staying true to your style. But underneath, it's just comfort. The belief that what worked before will always work again. And you rationalize what's missing. You tell yourself that those parts belong to someone else. Operations, development, strategy, the pieces you're unwilling to master. And you don't reject growth. You just redefine the entire job around what's familiar. And that's how it happens. You tell yourself the job hasn't really changed. You believe you haven't either, but quietly you have, and you're not moving forward. You're just going deeper into the version of you the business no longer fully needs. And that's the blind spot. You don't miss the signs because you can't see them. You miss them because you convinced yourself they don't apply to you. And I've seen this play out more times than I can count. Leaders stepping into roles with real potential, smart, capable people who had every opportunity to adapt but never did. It was because they didn't want to. They convinced themselves the role would always value what it valued when they first got the call. They believed the business would keep rewarding the same version of them, the one that fit the old story. And for a while, it works. Their experience still carried weight. Their results still look steady enough. But time starts doing what it always does. It exposes who is advancing and who's standing still. And the ones who don't adjust, don't collapse. They fade. They become less visible, less critical, and less relevant. And by the time they realize it, the decision's already been made. Not by a person, but by progress. Because in every business I've led, the roles that don't adapt always get rewritten. And the people who stay the same end up written out with them. And by the time most leaders realize that business has shifted, the story around them has already changed. So before that happens, stop and let's get honest with each other. Not with the company, but with yourself. You already know the answers. You've just been too busy defending your fit to look at them. So here comes the 3-part test. The parts that separate awareness from action. 1, do the hire yourself test. The question isn't, am I still qualified for this job title? The question is, do I still match the job description this business actually needs today? If your strengths like operations and controls are now being covered by a newly hired operational lead, would you still be the choice for the job you're in today? Or would that change expose you, making you uncomfortable about the value you can really bring now? 2, the real bar comparison. Look around you, not above you. Your peers, your direct reports, even recent hires. They're showing what the business values now. Their pace, their ideas, their skill mix. That's the new standard. If you find yourself managing their output instead of matching their range, you're not aligned to where the business is going. You're just holding where it's been. And the question you ask yourself, is my range of skills wide enough to match the pace of my best peers? And then finally, the competitor check. Forget your title. Look at their real job description. If your exact role opened at a top competitor, would you even get the interview? And it's not about results. It's based on what the actual role demands in today's market. And we all know the bar is different everywhere. But what another company requires might expose how narrow your current range really is. And the question is, does my skill set exceed the industry minimum, or is my current company hiding my exposure? And here's the part most leaders miss. While you're catching up to the new version of the role, the business is already moving on to the next one. And that's how people lose positions they thought they've mastered, not because they failed, but because they stayed still while everything around them moved. And at first, everything still looks fine. You're doing what you were asked to do. The reports line up, the scorecard reads steady. You're delivering on the same priorities that once made you the fix. But quietly, the priorities start to change. The parts of the business that weren't yours, the ones you never had to master, are now the center of attention. And suddenly, the skills you never built are the one everyone's talking about. Then you become what you've replaced. It's the same pattern playing out. You're just on the other side of it now. Because most businesses don't hire for long-term growth. They hire for correction. They fill one gap by creating another. And every time the environment shifts, the last solution becomes the next problem. And that's how it happens. You were brought in to fix what the last leader couldn't. And now the same narrative is being written about you. Not because you failed, because the business finally outgrew the reason you were chosen. The truth is simple. If you don't grow beyond the problem you were hired to solve, you eventually become it. The good news, it's fixable. The leaders who catch it early, who adjust before they're asked to, don't just keep their relevance, they expand it. They earn trust faster, they make their roles bigger than the job description, and they become the one people build around, not beyond. But the ones who wait, the ones who keep leading from the version they were hired for, end up in the same position as the person they replaced. Because the truth never changes. If you don't grow beyond the reason you were chosen, you eventually become the reason someone else is. Every week I break down the real strategy behind top performance for wealth advisors and leaders ready to operate at the level they're built for. This is EliteVate. We cut through the fluff, no hype, no theory, just strategy, psychology, and execution. If this hits home, subscribe. You're not just watching and learning, you will become the model others follow.